Welcome, everybody. This is an interview. It's part of the Historical Society of the New York Courts Lawyers' Response to the Pandemic Project. As you may know, this initiative creates a platform for New York State attorneys to share their experiences on practicing during the pandemic. Today is June 17th, 2021. My name is Benjamin Weissman. I'm an associate at Foley, Hoag, and I'm joined by Stephen Younger, who is a partner at Foley, Hoag. And Steve, you were actually interviewed on July 14th, 2020, almost a year ago. So we thought it would be useful to kind of touch base and see what's changed and what hasn't as we enter the reopening phase. So thanks for joining us. At least for me in the last year, a lot has changed. I actually changed firms in the last few months, semi-remotely. Everything is kind of new in this phase. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. What's changed?
And we actually changed firms together, which was a great pleasure for me. But first, on behalf of the board of the Historical Society, I want to thank everybody who's participated in this project. It's a great way to record what we've been living through. So for me, life has changed dramatically. A year ago, I couldn't go out and see people. I couldn't go to court. I couldn't meet with clients. I still have restrictions, but my whole mindset is completely different. And I felt that the first day I was vaccinated. I just felt that a weight had been lifted off my shoulder. Not that I was going to go crazy and do wild things, but that all of a sudden I could see people again. I could, interact with people. We as human beings are social animals, and we're meant to interact with people. And it was a difficult time not being able to do it, especially for someone like myself who enjoys being with people.
So can you talk a little bit about, what's changed since July of last year? I think you and I are both in the office right now, well, maybe in separate rooms, but, what's changed as we kind of enter this reopening phase?
Well, first I changed firms. So that for me was a dramatic change. And I think part of it had to do with the pandemic. I thought about my life differently. I had time to reflect. I had time to think out what I wanted to do with the next chapter of my life. And I think all of us have made different life plans as a result of the pandemic because we've thought differently about what we wanted to do. And if you asked me a year ago, I would have said I would be at my old firm forever. And here I am after 35 years, I'm at a new law firm. But I think that for me, the major change is last summer, I had no desire to come to the office. I had no desire to come to New York City. I came to New York a couple times, mainly to argue cases remotely, but I wanted to be in my office for that. And I just didn't feel that New York was the New York that I knew. Now I'm feeling much better about New York. I think the city is coming back. You see people on the streets. There still aren't a lot of people in the office. This week I had my first partners meeting live, and there were about, I'd say 60% of us, but I was meeting people, in person that I'd only met by Zoom. And the whole process of changing firms in a pandemic, it's like really bizarre, but somehow it worked.
Mm-hmm. So, as we both have changed firms, I think I couldn't have imagined meeting new people, with this new technology a year ago. But now I think, all of us have some degree of fluency on these platforms. What was your experience, going through the interview process and really getting integrated into a new firm?
I was surprised at how easy it was, but also how hard. I did about, 7, 8 interviews on a Sunday. And none of the people that I ever met before, but I felt like I got a very good sense of my new law firm, Foley Hoag. by meeting people over Zoom. And if you'd asked me that 2 years ago, I would have said, "Yeah, you can't find a job this way." But I really felt like I connected with people and could talk to them. I think the two hardest things were making the transition. One, after being at a firm for 35 years, I knew everybody from the chair of the firm down to the folks in the mailroom. And trying to understand new systems and new processes, particularly when your assistant isn't even sitting outside your office, you're having to, interact with administrative tasks remotely. Secondly, I just underestimated how hard it would be to move all my clients over, to interact with clients. It's just a huge process in normal times, but much huger in a pandemic. Although I must say, for the last few months, I came to the office the very first day that I was at Foley Hoag. By the way, it was the day after my second shot, so I practically fell asleep during my tech training. You're probably wondering who this guy was that they hired. But I have been coming to the office pretty regularly since then. And I've been going out to dinner with clients. I met with someone for breakfast this morning. Initially it was mostly outside. Now it's, as much inside as it is outside. And I think people are yearning to get back together. I think there's a certain sense of collaboration that you lose through these platforms, and you're not able to interact as well as you can in person. And I miss that. And I think, my clients did as well. I mean, just to put it in context, I have had two major social events at my firm in the last couple of weeks, one with about 40 people, the other with about 25 people. Couldn't have imagined doing that a year ago. I went to see a client in Mexico last week and went to a 400-person wedding, which I never could imagine doing. 10 days ago, I went to a black tie event with 300 people. Yeah, everybody had been asked for their vaccination records. Another thing, you never would have asked somebody about their health status before they went to a formal dinner, but it's now, sort of become de rigueur.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about, what are those nuances that we miss when we're remote, when we're, discussing things over Zoom? What have you really missed that you can now have back in person?
I think it's in a word, collaboration. When you sit down with somebody, ideas come up that you hadn't thought about before. I think you're not as distracted. I think if you're on these platforms, you're more apt to go check your phone underneath the table. If you're in live with somebody, you're going to look them in the eye. You're not going to be as distracted. You're going to venture off into new things that weren't just on the agenda, just weren't part of the program. Mm-hmm. You're going to explore things that you hadn't known about. I see it even more with the formal processes. I think depositions are much more rote. I tried an arbitration last fall, and I must say it was kind of like watching a perpetual PowerPoint. It just wasn't as interesting as being there live. You and I have a trial coming up in a few weeks, and it's going to be virtual. I would much rather have it live. I just think the dynamic of an in-person interaction, it's much harder to cross-examine somebody over a platform. You can do it. We've all figured out how to do it. But I think when you want to show something to a witness, you want to point something out, you want to have them explain something, you want to control the witness. There are all these kind of dynamics that are they're not impossible, but they're just more difficult on these platforms.
Mm-hmm. So you speak a little bit about the things that, you think require in-person interaction. So trials, witness examination, client meetings, team meetings. But, is there anything you think that we'll keep from the past year and a half that you think maybe we've improved on?
Yeah, a number of things. I think we're much more efficient. I see it in my own personal life. I use a lot less paper than I used to use. Mm-hmm. I used to print off everything. Now
Yeah.
I print off about 10% of what I used to. I think if I have a witness who's not in, within, 10, 20 miles of me, I'm going to use this medium first. I think my clients will expect it. They're not going to say, get on a plane and go to Singapore just because, unless it's like an absolutely critical witness. I think for the court system, there's a major change because I really believe the courts have embraced this technology. I had a preliminary injunction argument in January, and the judge was very facile with using virtual mechanisms, was really explaining my adversary through them. And I think the courts are now very comfortable with them. And my sense is that for routine conferences, this will be the standard. And it saves us all time. Why should I have to take 20 minutes to go down to court, sit around and wait, and then 20 minutes back? I could cover 3 conferences in the time it would take to cover one. I could do another one in Saratoga, New York, and just be all over the place. On the other hand, there's certain things, a substantive motion argument, a settlement conference. Settlement conferences are just much tougher. And obviously trials, we're all looking forward to trials. One thing though I do worry about is, it used to be you'd go to court as a young lawyer, you'd watch other lawyers while you were waiting. You're not going to be able to do that as much. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that we're going to lose.
Definitely. I mean, do you think, I know you're only speaking for yourself, but do you think that, that feeling is shared across, across the profession? Do you find yourself in tension with colleagues or adversaries about, what needs to be remote, what needs to be in person, et cetera?
Well, I've had the good fortune of doing, 7 or 8 seminars on a development that came out in the middle of the pandemic, which is, my practice is much in the commercial division, and they started to apply the rules, many of the rules in the non-commercial parts. And so I've done a bunch of seminars on these issues. And one of the issues I always start with is this particular one. I ask both the judges and I ask the members of the bar, and I've seen just uniform views that this mechanism has made us more efficient. This will stay and we'll keep using it, but there are certain things that need to be in person. And where the judges are figuring that out, the lawyers are figuring that out. And I think each judge will handle things differently. But I think it will be pretty common that when you have a settlement conference, when you have a really critical juncture, a dispositive motion or a key discovery motion, and obviously a trial will be there in person.
Do you see a way to, I know you talked about the concern that the junior lawyers may not have the same exposure to some of these things. Do you see a way around that, or any kind of suggested best practices for that going forward?
Yeah, it's something that really worries me. I think a lot of associates felt isolated during the pandemic. I mean, if we partners felt isolated, we were, interacting with people probably more than associates were. We didn't have the same levels of interaction. So, for example, if I worked on a brief, I wouldn't have somebody in my office to go over a draft of a brief. So it was much more difficult to have the kind of mentoring experiences, the training experiences. One of the things they asked me to do when I joined Foley was to be a mentor to a summer associate. I haven't done that in I don't know how many years. And I've had weekly interactions with a summer associate. I've asked the person to share with me their frustrations, their pleasures, their disappointments. And so I think it's about being in contact and trying to talk with people, about, and this is someone I still have not met, in person. So that you let them know that there is this chain of communication. It's still more difficult than I would otherwise be, and partly is you're just not running into people, right? So part of it was you would see someone at the coffee machine and you just start talking about whatever, and
Yeah.
that just doesn't happen.
Yeah, you can't just schedule a Zoom for 5 minutes on your way to the bathroom or something.
Right, exactly. The one thing that's really interesting, now, when I started here at Foley, there were two other folks that were here every day. They were here mostly to get out of their apartments. Their apartments were too small or too crowded. And when we first started, we were all wearing masks. Now almost nobody wears a mask around the office, and there are more people. So you're seeing more of that just kind of casual interaction. I mean, I noticed it yesterday. We had more people in the office than typical, and people were just kind of seeking each other out because they missed that.
It did feel like a sort of a homecoming, which was a great energy in the office.
That's a great way to put it. It really was like a homecoming.
Can you talk a little bit about, what you and Foley are doing in this reopening process? Just kind of some logistics, and what are some of the policies you think that are going to be helpful as we all come back to the office?
Yeah, so we're all grappling with this. I think the top questions are, when do people start coming in, in a mandatory way as opposed to just a voluntary way? I think a lot of firms like Foley Hoag are doing things to make it easier for people, because change is tough for everything. It was tough for us to go, work out of our basements, and now it's tough to change back, right? So there were a lot of voluntary, kind of more fun events. I mentioned, we've had a couple of social events. We have some more coming up in July. They're just meant to get people to re-engage, to start, getting back together. But I think the typical law firm is targeting September as the time to reopen. Mm-hmm. But I think the key question will be, once you do reopen, how much you actually come into the office, because I don't think people will be coming in every single day. There's a great savings in commuting time. There's a great savings in efficiency. On the other hand, there's something you lose by not being in person. Mm-hmm. And before the pandemic, my sense was it was really childcare issues which were predominant in terms of, giving people the option not to come into the office. Maybe one day a month you had a plumber coming to your apartment, so you would stay home and work. But the average person, it was expected you were in the office. I think that's going to change. And I've heard some firms saying that they'll have particular days for a department. The corporate lawyers will be on Tuesday, the litigators will be on Wednesday, the real estate lawyers will be Thursday. Because you do have to have times when you kind of know you'll interact. In Boston, the firm Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for a long time has had a lot of the support staff there, because they know that they kind of need to see each other and interact. Mm-hmm. But I think we're going to have to be very fluid, much more fluid than we've been in the past. I think the hard part will be the people who either aren't vaccinated or have some other condition, or who have kids. And right now, there are a lot of kids who can't be vaccinated. And so that will be kind of an overhang. And of course, we're all worried, is there going to be another re-explosion and another reoccurrence? I'm personally less worried about that, but you have to always keep that in the back of your mind. Mm-hmm. But I think all of us are going to be kind of, reinventing this as we go along.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the Boston office. That reminded me. Can you talk a little bit about how it's changed, working across offices in the pandemic, and now Foley Hoag has 3 offices in the U.S. What's changed about that over the past year?
Oh, it's totally new for me. I came from an office where I only have one office in New York, and many of the people I work with are in Boston. So I work with a lot of associates in Boston. I work with a number of partners in Boston. I work with some folks down in DC. And it's utterly seamless. I mean, it's just, I think it shows me that it's very easy to have these kind of multiple office dynamics. And there are some cost savings there because, rates aren't as high in Boston, obviously, as in New York. Real estate is not as high in Boston. Boston, et cetera. So it was an eye-opener for me because I hadn't been part of a multiple office setting before. The hard part was working with people you never met. So I've made a real effort to go to the home office, and I've been there 3 times in the last 6 weeks. Every time I go, I meet 2, 3 partners. I'll sit outside and have a coffee with them just to, try to get to know who they are, really get, a sense that, we're partners together, and, but I imagine in normal times that's much easier than it is in a pandemic, but I think it's really important when you're part of a multiple office setting to do that.
I mean, I from everything you're saying, I'm hearing a sense of real optimism. Is that the case? Is Midtown Manhattan back? Are we all going to be back in the office? Going through Midtown Manhattan again?
Well, I personally have a sense of optimism, mainly because once I got the vaccine, I felt like I could do things that I was restrained from doing. And I'm seeing it on the streets. I mean, I just see more people walking around without masks, more people on the street, more, I was out to lunch yesterday, the place was mobs. I've flown on planes. I mean, the first time I flew a plane, it was like really weird, but the airports are packed with people. This week when I went to Mexico, every plane was filled to the gills. There wasn't a seat empty. I don't think Midtown is quite back. You can just see it from the insides of the offices. There are, maybe 10, 15% occupancy. But I think the mood is much better. And I'm hopeful that by September, we will be much more back. I don't think we're ever going to be at 100% occupancy the way we were before, but I think you'll see it. And I worry about, the number of people who depend on the courts, the businesses, the number of people come to Midtown. You think about the shoe shine guy, the newsstand person, the halal carts. We still have lots of halal carts in front of us. The hot dog vendor. There's so many people who depend on that Midtown economy, and many of them were just had no business for a full year, which is like pretty hard to imagine.
Absolutely. Well, great. I think this has been really kind of illuminating, and thank you, Steve, for your work on this. It's been fascinating to see kind of. I don't think any of us could have imagined getting to this place where we are now a year ago. So, it's really important to kind of mark that, I think.
Yeah, it's funny because you think about how fast they develop these vaccines, and I can remember it being sort of a theoretical, hypothetical context. So when we have a vaccine, we have a vaccine, But once, and by the way, it was one of the bizarre things was like how hard it was to get them in the beginning. It was kind of like they were giving out tickets to a Bruce Springsteen concert or something, but you kind of felt like once you had it, it just changed your outlook on the world. And I just feel better about the world, and I feel better about our profession. We still have a long way to go. Our courts still aren't really fully reopened, but I think we'll be there soon enough. And thank you, Ben, for doing this and for joining me here at Foley, and thanks to the Historical Society for sponsoring this program.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for tuning into the interview. You can find out more information about the project and the society by going to our website, history.nycourts.gov. It's history.nycourts.gov. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.